Well, here we are in the Bowdoin Room. Schooner Bowdoin, this little model here of the schooner Bowdoin, this was Admiral Donald McMillan's Arctic research vessel. He took that little vessel on 26 voyages above the Arctic Circle. He was an amazing man. He lived with the Eskimo in his early life. 4 years he spent with the Eskimos up in the northern reaches of the world here in Greenland, and lived with them and learned their ways. He went with Peary on the North Pole trip. He spent early life in the Arctic and loved it. Well, he decided that they didn't really know much about the Arctic, so he would take scientists and he put them aboard a vessel and take them north. Had the little Bowdoin built, William Hand designed, built right down here at Hudson Brothers down in Booth Bay Harbor, only 88 feet long, pretty little vessel, but she was built scientifically so that she wouldn't be nipped in the ice. They gave her dead rise so she would pop out of the ice if the ice trapped her. She had her bow reinforced so she could run into the ice and break it with her own stem. You notice she doesn't have a bowsprit. That was because bowsprits were too vulnerable for this kind of activity. Research vessels, the vicissitudes they go through, they're aground, they have no charts, they nipped in the ice, and they have terrible, terrible trials in their life. This little vessel went north in 1921 with Donald McMillan. They went way up above the Arctic Circle, the northern part of Greenland, just as far north as you could get without going onto the polar ice cap, which is unnavigable. And they set in this little harbor, they called it Refuge Harbor. Little fine place there. In the summertime, they dropped their anchor down. It was beautiful. And they weathered in there 335 days through the winter, through the long, dark winter, 335 days, banked snow up around the hull, and they built igloos, 3 igloos on deck so that they would keep the polar bears out of the vessel and so that they could themselves enter and leave the vessel during the dark winter on their research. They were there 335 days and had to get back to Gloucester at the end of their tenure. In the summer, they expected to heave up and sail blissfully away. Well, it wasn't the summer for that. It was a cold summer. They still had ice. Come the middle of summer, they couldn't get out. Come September, they had fresh ice forming. Oh my God, they got to find a way to get out of there. So they decided the best thing to do would be to take the coal that they had down in the bowels of her. They had a coal stove. They took the coal and the soot from the stove and they sprinkled it on the ice in front of the vessel. That drew the sun. That would make the sun eat the ice up a little bit of warmth. They had an old CO engine in her. They ran the engine ahead and broke that ice and moved ahead a little bit more, put more coal out, moved ahead a little more soot and coal. They finally got around to that feather of water all around the edges of this little harbor that is kept open by the action of the tide going up and down. Well, of course, at low tide, it was all a beach, rocks and all that. At high tides, the only time they could navigate, she drew 10 feet of water and they had 10 feet of tide. So just at the very top of the tide could they move the vessel through this little bit of waterway along the edge of the ice. They were banging on rocks, banging on the ice, trying to get over to this little entrance to this harbor. They finally got over till they were almost at the entrance when a 16 million ton iceberg blew up and completely shut the entrance off. Oh my gosh, they were only prepared for one winter there. They've got to get out somehow. What are they going to do? They got out and they perused the situation. They could see that this iceberg had a little neck of ice that was stuck off of it and caught on a rock. And they thought, gee, if we could only knock that little piece of ice off without hitting the rock and without hitting the iceberg, which would stave the vessel up, maybe they'd be able to get out. So they backed the vessel all the way up as far as they could, right on the top of the tide, nailed down the governor. They ran hell and Larrapy as hard as they could for that thing. They struck it, slid up like that, and slid back down again and didn't get out. Oh, now what are we going to do? My gosh, there isn't anything else to do except try again. We had to wait for another tide. We had to wait for a higher run of tide. The tides vary quite a lot because of the position of the moon. Get a higher run of tide. They backed up as far as they could, get all the inertia that they could muster with that vessel, everything flying. They struck that little ledge there. They broke it off and they slid out just as the iceberg closed in behind them and shut off. the entire entrance. They got back to Gloucester, but that was only the beginning of the incredible career of the schooner Bowdoin. Well, that was only the beginning of the story. The little old Bowdoin went back to the north again with Donald McMillan over and over again. 26 voyages they made above the Arctic Circle. They did wonderful, wonderful work researching, of course, charting every rock they ran on, and they ran on a lot of them. And they would get nipped in the ice, of course. This is the vicissitudes that a research vessel goes through. The Bowdoin went through all of them. But back she went to the Arctic over and over again. They wintered in other places, in northern Greenland and northern Labrador, in various places. They built ice houses out on the ice there and lived over and over again the way the Inuit did in the north, learning their ways and helping them out, doing a lot of goodness for the Inuit. They took a schoolhouse on the Bowdoin. They constructed a schoolhouse on the Bowdoin from materials they took all the way up there, constructed a schoolhouse, the first schoolhouse they ever had in the northern part of Labrador, in Nain. And when they did that, they decided the Inuit language was just a spoken language at that time. They didn't have a written language. So they decided they would make a dictionary. They would set up a dictionary for the Inuit language. Then the Moravians decided with a dictionary they would make a Bible. And I want to show you that Bible. And from that dictionary, the Moravians made a Bible. And here is the Bible written in the Inuit language for the Eskimo. The very first Bible ever put together for the Inuit of northern Labrador. So the old Bowdoin went back and forth to the Arctic over and over again, 26 voyages on research, charting, and doing all this wonderful work in the Arctic, and never lost a man and never hurt anybody seriously. What a tremendous tribute to Donald McMillan. Absolutely amazing, amazing Captain Donald McMillan. So he was anointed admiral of his fleet. His fleet consisted of the schooner Bowdoin. And later on during his life, he decided he, of course, would retire, as we all do. When he got to be 85, he figured he'd had enough Arctic voyaging. So he fit his vessel out, he put sails on it, put his charts aboard, and everything had the vessel all ready to go. And he donated it to Mystic Seaport Museum down in Connecticut. Well, she went there with a lot of notoriety, a lot of celebration, but Mystic Seaport wasn't interested in that boat. She languished there for 10 years, and they never lifted a finger for her maintenance. They never put any oil on her decks or anything else. Now she's getting to be an old vessel. And finally, a woman stepped down through one of the planking on the foredeck with her high heel, so they closed the vessel. Then, with their infinite wisdom, they took the masts out of the vessel. They decided they would take her apart. They took the masts out, they took the engine out, they put the windlass on the shore. They took all the hardware off of that hull. Why would they do that? They were going to sink it. Admiral McMillan now is 95 years old, living in Provincetown. He saw this happening. He said, my God, they're going to ruin my vessel. I gave it to them for posterity, and they're going to ruin my vessel. I've got to get it away from there. I've got to find something else, find a new owner for it, so find some way of preserving her. I called him up in 1967, and he gave me the boat. Take her to Maine, he said, Jim. Take her to Maine and do what you can with her. So I got a friend of mine, Ransom Kelly, the vessel Magnum, to tow her from Mystic to my dock in Camden. I put the old engine, the engine was sitting on the beach with the sand blowing through it. I put it back on board its beds. I took the masts, they had broken the mainmast in half. I put it back on those broken spars on deck. The poor old thing looked like a derelict when I finally got her to my dock in Camden. This is what she looked like when I tied her up alongside, the rails and bulwark falling off of her. Her engine, they took the engine out of her, never even opened the hatch up to take it out. They just ripped it right out through the top. She hadn't been hauled out of the water in a dozen years, so we put her on the beach and we did her bottom for the first time. I had to take the foredeck off of her. The foredeck was all rotting away. I had to take the brake beam and this house out. I put new foredeck on her. You can see the new work there. They had broken the mainmast in half, taking it out. I had to put new mainmast in her. So I went down to Aroostook County because I didn't have any money. I bought a tree, a great black spruce, very straight. We made a new mainmast the old-fashioned way. First you take the tree and you square it up straight and true, the diameter of the new mast, then you 8-side it, then you 16-side it, then you 32-side it, then you 64-side it, then you plane it round. They say any damn fool, after you get 64 sides, any damn fool can plane it round. So we rounded it up, put the masts back in her, and got her sailing again, and we sailed her down to Provincetown to salute McMillan. McMillan now is 96 years old. We were worried we wouldn't get there in time, so we cobbled the vessel together. We didn't have any electronics, we didn't have anything. We had patches on her hull, all kinds of things like that we did in order to get that vessel down there while McMillan was still alive and still able. Well, first thing we did was go down to Boston, of course, and lay overnight in Boston. We were to cross over Mass Bay the next day, Provincetown, over to Provincetown, and there would be 400 people waiting for us down there because they knew we were coming. I knew where McMillan's house was on the shore there, but I didn't know exactly where. But we started out from Boston, and darned if it didn't fog up. Dungeon thick of fog. By the time we hit the middle of Mass Bay out there, trying to feel our way over to Provincetown, dungeon thick, we couldn't see anything. We didn't have any radars or any of that electronic stuff. We had a compass and a lead line, that's all we had. So we were running out our time, we ran out our time. I knew we were getting close to the shore over there, so I said, get the lead out and start sounding. So we're dropping the lead over the bow of the vessel, and you can measure the depth of water with a line that has markings on it. That's a lead line. So we're dropping it over, the bottom's coming up as we're closer we get, sailing along and through the fog, coming up until finally the leadsman said, 3 fathom, Cap. I said, 3 fathom? Well, we can't go any further. That is 18 feet. We're drawing 10.5. So I said, we've got to turn and go back now over to the dock where people are waiting for us. So I spun the wheel over and I jibed the main over, and just about that time we entered a corridor of clear weather right up to the shore, and there was McMillan standing on his porch ringing his bell. He could hear our horn, he knew we were there, and he was ringing his bell. My God, it was God-given. Here was a corridor of clear air. He saw the Bowdoin sailing across that corridor. We immediately, after 100 more feet, entered the fog again, but he caught a glimpse of us sailing, and he was so pleased to see her sailing again that he gave me all of these things for her. He gave me the barograph and the thermograph off of the Bowdoin. He gave me his binoculars. He gave me the set of ice goggles they used up in the Arctic to keep for their eyes from burning up from the sunlight and everything. He gave me this narwhal tusk, this wonderful narwhal tusk here. You know the narwhal probably, that crazy whale indigenous to the Arctic, has a spiral tusk that comes out as they develop. There's a little story about them right there. Also, he gave me that rifle. That rifle up there on the wall belonged to Robert Peary in 1909 when they discovered the North Pole. In 1909, he and Henson went across the ice to plant the flag for the very first time on the North Pole, and McMillan was on that trip, but he had frozen feet, so he couldn't go. So Peary said, here, Mac, you take my gun, protect yourself from the polar bears until we get back. And that's where that rifle came from. So you see, we have some very incredibly valuable treasures right here at the Sail, Power and Steam Museum. So the old Bowdoin was sailing again. People loved it. I spent 3 years rebuilding her. I spent the next 3 to 4 years carrying passengers out of Camden on the old Bowdoin. Historic Bowdoin, everybody loved that vessel because of her history. Well, we had some changes in life. We moved into other vessels. The Coast Guard had new regulations. They wanted me to change the configuration of the Bowdoin. I said I won't do it. The vessel is too historic. We've got to keep her and preserve her the way she is. The Bowdoin Association was formed, and they took the vessel over a period of years in between. She had some disasters and some minor accidents at the time, but eventually a woman got a hold of the Bowdoin, and she gave it to the Maine Maritime Academy in Castine. Their training used her for training then. They're training young mariners, and they're taking the Bowdoin and going back to the Arctic, training young mariners with that vessel. She's been all rebuilt now, has a good long life, a big endowment there at the Maine Maritime Academy, and she's one of the few, she's the reason that the Academy there has the ability to give a mariner a sail license, the only one in the country because of the schooner Bowdoin that can issue a sail license, Coast Guard license, as a master mariner. Success story. Thank you.